Good evening. I'd like to welcome all participants to this panel discussion sponsored by National Society of Professional Engineers of California, NSPE-CA, the National Society of Professional Engineers Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee, and the San Diego County Engineering Council, SDCEC. My name is Ken DeSenza. I'm a professional engineer practicing civil engineering in San Diego, California. I've been actively involved with NSPE since the mid-1990s. And in that same time period, I've also been involved in all of the evolving versions of San Diego County Engineering Council. We're pleased to have you here tonight for this presentation and panel discussion. We have three engineers who have direct experience with issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. They are here to offer their stories. Within tonight's 90-minute program, the format will be to have each speaker make his or her presentation, and we will then open the remaining portion of the time to address questions from the audience with answers from the speakers. On your screen throughout the evening, you'll have the opportunity to open the Zoom chat, the function at the bottom of your screen, to communicate with each of your fellow attendees and to also add comment at any time during the program. If you have any questions that are specific for a speaker or general questions for all of the speakers, please select the Zoom Q&A button and type in your questions. Please do not use the chat function for the speaker questions. Also, we request that you not use the chat for spam, marketing, or inappropriate comments. We have a monitor off camera who will be reviewing the chat box and sorting through the questions during the presentations for live answers at the end of the presentations. This presentation this evening is being recorded for future use by NSPE and SDCEC. I'd like to begin this evening with our first introduction to the first speaker, who is a member of the NSPE DEI Advisory Committee, Carrie Greenfelder, a professional engineer licensed in 6 states. Carrie serves as a department manager for the water division of Burns and McDonnell in Kansas City, Missouri. She has a BS in chemical engineering and specializes in water and wastewater treatment, project management, and is also certified design build professional. Carrie is active in the Society of Women Engineers, SWE, Water Environmental Federation, and also in National Society of Professional Engineers. Over the past 2+ decades, Carrie has been involved in the design and management of both small and large water and wastewater treatment projects for a variety of municipal, public, industrial, federal, and design build clients. Carrie is a director on the Society of Women Engineers, SWE Board of Directors, and as a SWE Life member also. She has dedicated her skills and talents to a myriad of leadership positions at every level of the society. She is an active leader in numerous organizations, including Water Environmental Federation and National Society of Professional Engineers. I bring you Carrie Greenfelder.
Well, good evening. My name is Carrie Greenfelder. I'm a registered chemical engineer and a certified design build professional. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about applying my chemical engineering degree in the real world and share with you some reflections that I've had over the past 23 years. Let me start with a bit of an introduction to myself, and then I'll move into what the real world has been really like for me. I'll talk a bit about some of my experiences and share some fun photos with you. There might be a bit there that I talk about a visit I took to jail. And then I'll talk about my altruistic side and what I do serving our community and professional organizations. So first, who am I? Well, again, it's Carrie Greenfelder. I have a bachelor's in chemical engineering and I went to the University of Kansas. I've been a chemical engineer, a registered professional engineer that is, since January of 2008. I've worked for 3 large companies. The first, John Deere Vehicle Group. The second, CDM Smith, predominantly in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And now I'm employed with Burns & McDonnell in the Kansas City metro area. Where I've worked is a much longer list, and I gave up after I typed out most of those names. But I've worked in a lot of different states across the entire United States. And I tell you, I had more airline miles, and I really had more airline miles by age 24 than most people really get in a lifetime. So let's start with the real world and what it's really like. What I thought being a chemical engineer would be like would be pretty exciting. I thought I'd be driving a pretty fast, nice car. I'd live in a big mansion and I would just have piles and piles of cash. That's what I assumed engineers were like. Think about Tony Stark, AKA Iron Man. He has all of these things, right? I thought I'd be in the corner office. I'd have the highest fashion to wear every day, be jet setting, work in pretty neat labs as a chemical engineer. And well, what I found, the truth really was, I spend a lot of time in the field. I actually spend most of my time watching projects that I design come to life. I work with a lot of constructors, operators, different managers. I do spend some time in the lab, but I spend a lot of time also in meetings, brainstorming with other engineers and coming up with great ideas for what I do. I also spend a lot of my time, especially in this pandemic, on the phone. There's a lot that I do that I coordinate with others across the United States to design and develop the projects that I work on. And I don't have a mansion per se, but here in the Midwest, I have a decent 2-story house. That's my family there in the middle. I have 1 son who's 11. My husband is also an engineer. He works here in the Kansas City area for Garmin. And I can tell you, I love life and I love the way that this has all turned out for me. So let me talk now about some of my experiences and how I've used my chemical engineering degree. So I started working for John Deere Vehicle Group actually while I was still in college. And so I predominantly worked on the John Deere Gators, like you see in the picture here. And I worked on the paint systems. And so the paint systems basically turn these to green or yellow. And with that became a lot of wastewater and water purification work to make sure that the paint could be applied correctly. I had some great days in the field, and I had some other days where I had to do some paint cleanup all the time. But I got to use a lot of my chemical engineering degree, process design, materials, lots of different applications of fluids. And I had safety there because I also worked in the field on job sites already when I was with John Deere, was already traveling mainly to the East Coast while I was still in college. From there, I went to CDM Smith in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and now at Burns & McDonnell again here in Kansas City. And in this new role as a consultant, I've done a little bit of everything. And you see some on the screen here of some of the different types of work that I've done. But I put a big heart next to water and wastewater treatment. And so while I may not have that fast Ferrari or that giant mansion or piles and piles of cash, what I have really found applying my water and wastewater treatment skills and expertise has been so much more fulfilling than I ever thought it would be. And I did put the chemical element here, ytterbium. I don't know if you've worked with that one, but I got a pretty neat project that I did when I was in Albuquerque for an R&D facility, and really got to tie into my chemical engineering roots, and I just loved it. And so I'm talk a little bit now about what I've done in the water and wastewater space. I'll start with just a few pictures here of some different projects that I've had, and kind of touch on why those have been fulfilling for me. So one of my first projects when I started with CDM Smith was working in Los Alamos, New Mexico. You see, they had a big wildfire and they actually had enough water to put out parts of the fire. They just couldn't access the water. And so took it upon our team to design a new drinking water tank, demo some of their old drinking water tanks, and make sure that they had adequate water supply should they ever have a large fire again. Spent a lot of time in the field for this project. And so let me show you a couple pictures here. The first one was building this tank. And so new tank was built in the hillside, and unfortunately you can see some of those burned trees kind of in the background there. But lots of time spent in the field. Got to do some pretty cool blasting to make space for this tank, but we moved the tank to higher ground so the water could be accessed at least using gravity should their power systems go out. Here's the finished product of the tank here, and we actually chose this color. It's kind of a little green, a little silver, but it blends in with the environment, and hopefully it'll blend a little better once some of these trees grow back. And then what we did on the other side of town was actually tore down one of the old tanks that they had. And so used some different skills here. I actually became certified in lead-based paint abatement. And so we did some abatement work on this tank before we chopped it all down. And so pretty neat day at a job site to use a giant shearing machine. I was actually not able to drive the machine, but the sound of that thing kind of cutting through the tank was a pretty awesome day in the field. From there, I did some work down in the southeast corner of New Mexico, and I worked on one of the largest cheese factories in the United States. You might not know this, but New Mexico is quite the cheese producer in the Southwest. And so what I worked on was a sewer line, basically from the cheese factory to their municipal plant. And so a lot of fun on the construction oversight here. There's a picture of the cheese factory under construction, but lots of stainless steel, very clean environment there. And so this pipeline that we put from the cheese factory 5 miles over to the wastewater plant was a pretty cool project. I chose this particular photo because you can see just barely in the background there's a little white pipeline. Well, that was actually a gas pipeline that went all the way through New Mexico into Texas. And so we had to find a way to thread our pipe under that without making anyone in Texas and New Mexico lose their gas service. So that was pretty interesting. And then I spent 3 years of my career actually on one project. And this is just such a fulfilling experience to me. It was called the Arsenic Removal Demonstration Facility, or ARTF. Not real catchy acronym that we had there. But this project actually was because of some of the promulgations of new rules related to removing arsenic from drinking water. And so this conveniently was about 2 miles from my house in Albuquerque. So not only was I fulfilling some needs of the community, but even my own water supply service to my own house. And so for 3 years, I was involved with the design, all the construction, and then the plant was actually turned on in July of 2007. And so just a few pictures here. What we have, this is where the facility started. And so middle of the high desert there in the background are the petroglyphs in New Mexico. So if you're familiar with Albuquerque, this is over on the west side of town. I put some of the skills that I had to use for my degree here. One of those I put at the bottom, language arts. I actually had to learn how to speak kind of construction-ese and use my Spanish skills while working with the crews. And so pretty fulfilling project all in all. This next picture here was just some of the site plans that we did and how we laid this tank out. Laid this facility out. Here's a couple more of what the inside of it looked like. And then bringing to life. This was it at the finish. And so just the picture on my left here, if you look in the background, that was my neighborhood that was served by this facility. But this was a coagulation microfiltration facility to remove the arsenic from the groundwater. Here's a couple pictures inside, and on the right side, I got to pick all the fun colors of the finished facility. And it was always great when I'd give tours of this later. Folks would come in and you could just tell instantly from their expression, either they loved it or they hated the color scheme. And so always made me either really proud or a little embarrassed at the same time. Here was one day when I was in the field. There was actually a kind of a fluke snowstorm in Albuquerque that was about 3 feet of snow. So interesting day to be working in the field there. But from there, I moved a little bit south in New Mexico down to Valencia County, so just south of Albuquerque, if you're familiar with New Mexico. This is where we did a master plan or an evaluation of both their water and wastewater facilities. Valencia County, very widespread, but really we were helping them get a reliable drinking water supply and reliable wastewater treatment for the entire county. Some areas of the county, very good. This picture here on the left was part of the water system, pretty high tech. And then there'd be others. This tank was actually refurbished from a refinery and had a little doghouse that someone built next to it to house some of the electrical equipment. And I mentioned at the beginning that I went to jail. Part of Valencia County, there are a couple jails actually in Valencia County, had to evaluate the water and wastewater systems at the jail. So that was a pretty interesting day in my long career here. I don't recommend you go to jail. It was a little scary. From there, one interesting project I also did, I spent about a year in Portland, Oregon. This really was just quite fulfilling for me. I worked on a debris management plan, and really what this was, the city of Portland wanted to have a good plan of action together should an earthquake take out large portions of the city. And instead of just throwing away and starting over for anything that was damaged, they wanted to find ways to recycle and reuse a lot of the debris. A lot of cities don't do that. So it was very interesting to try something a little bit different and prepare a plan. And I called a lot of recyclers in town and said, you know, if you had tons and tons and tons of steel that showed up kind of at a moment's notice, could you recycle it or help us reuse it? And so a lot of work to kind of put this plan together. Is pretty exciting. And in summary here, I just really want to show that, you know, a lot of chemical engineers go off to work on oil rigs or in factories, and you can really work in many different fields with a chemical engineering degree. And I went through this fairly quickly, but I put some of the classes and skills that I've used. I've really used a lot of my schooling in the real world here, and I still keep learning. Everything changes. I also, just a tip here at the bottom, I had to be open-minded and work smart and check your work twice before anything gets built, because very fulfilling to be able to see what you do on paper come to life, but you want to make sure that, you know, you ran your calculations correctly and you did that sort of measure twice before you cut once. But I want to wrap up here at the end with a bit of my altruistic side. I spend a lot of my time volunteering. I volunteer and raise my hand. I joke that I have raised arm syndrome, but I volunteer for everything. And I do it because I want to teach everyone. And I show some kids up here on the screen. That's really what I love to do, is to do some outreach and give back and help grow and mentor our future generation of engineers. I really, again, I volunteer for almost everything. This is just a partial list of some of the organizations I'm involved with. I spent a lot of time working at the University of New Mexico, taught a few classes. I'd always mentor the incoming freshmen and the outgoing seniors. I mentor my new staff when they come in the door at Burns and McDonnell. And so this list, I could add 12 more slides, but I encourage you to also raise your hand to help mentor and grow our next generation of engineers. And why do I do it? Well, it's for the recognition. And just kidding. Not only have I received some recognition for some of the work that I've done, and some of those are industry awards, some are corporate awards, but I've also helped a lot of the communities I've worked with be recognized for their efforts and their work we've done. And so it's very fulfilling, to help a small, especially a small utility, get an award and be recognized for really moving the needle and taking the next step, especially in the areas of water and wastewater treatment. And so here with a thank you, there's my contact information. And I just want to show one last fun picture here. This is actually from a tire recycling facility that caught fire in the Southwest. And so we did a bit of a cleanup for that. And this was one of the tires that did not catch fire. And so before we took it off to the recycler, I just wanted to have one last picture with some of my team. and celebrate a job well done. So I appreciate your time. I look forward to some of your questions, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Carrie. Our next speaker is also a member of the NSPE-DEI Advisory Committee, Richard B. Easley. As an engineer with a unique perspective in the field, Richard is president of E-Squared Consulting Corporation. E-Squared is a small minority business consulting firm conducting transportation services in 34 US states and 22 countries worldwide. Mr. Easley was inducted into the University of Texas at Austin Civil, Architectural, Environmental, Engineering Academy of Distinguished Alumni. Richard takes every feasible opportunity to speak with those that think a career in the field of engineering is too hard to achieve. Richard believes that there can be no greater accomplishment than to be a positive influence for younger people that can change their lives for better. I present to you Richard Easley.
My name is Richard Easley. I'm the president of E-Squared Engineering, and I am going to talk to you a little bit about my perspective of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and start by telling you a little bit about who I am. First, let me tell you that my father graduated from high school and joined the military, joined the Army. And my mother was never able to graduate from high school. They went off together. My brother was born, then I was born 3 years later. I was actually born in Okinawa when Dad was stationed in Okinawa. We had a chance to go everywhere as a family together with Dad, except his 2 tours of Vietnam. But everywhere else we went. We were in Okinawa, we were in Presidio, San Francisco, we were in Ankara, Turkey. We were in Walter Reed there in Washington, D.C., Texas. We were in New Mexico, Philadelphia. We're in a lot of different places together, Germany. So I got a chance to experience different cultures and meet different people with different perspectives. And I got a chance to witness firsthand racism, not only in this country, but around the world. And it was not always bad. I didn't always run into racism, but when we did, certainly as a young man, I never understood why people treated us the way they did without even knowing who we were. That life is not fair. So when I came back, graduated from high school, I knew that I wanted to be one of 3 things, and I knew this from an early age. My parents didn't go to college, and they knew they wanted their 2 sons to go to college. Now, I know you only went to college for 3 reasons. 1, to be a doctor. To be a doctor, you have to go to college, then you got to go to medical school. 2nd was to be a lawyer. And to be a lawyer, you got to go to college, then you got to go to law school. And the 3rd reason to go to college was to be an engineer. And for an engineer, you go to college, and then you go out and make money. Okay. Done. I want to be an engineer. That's it. Plain and simple. Well, what I found is growing up, and you can do the research on this yourself, you'll see that teachers never really pushed minority students and females, young girls, very hard when it came to school subjects. Part of that, I know I was pushed to consumer math, where I would learn how to make change in high school. And from there, I took Intro to Algebra 1, and then Algebra 1, and then Geometry. Meanwhile, my counterparts started off in high school with Algebra 1, and then Geometry, and then Algebra 2, and then Trigonometry, and they were ready for college. I finished with just Geometry, but I figured I was ready for college. When I went to UT at El Paso, I wanted to be an engineer, right? So you got to take calculus, but you got to take pre-calculus first. So I took pre-calculus, and lo and behold, I failed it. flunked it. So, okay, I got it. I got it next time. So I took it a second time. And when I took it a second time, yeah, I failed it then too. So, okay, third time's a charm, right? So I took it a third time. Yes, I failed it again. And so I took it a fourth time. And I failed it a fourth time. At this point, I'm thinking, I'm not doing so good at this. Maybe this whole engineering thing, no, definitely this whole engineering thing is too much for me. In fact, I was actually put on, not suspension. Yeah, I was put on suspension. I was kicked out of school. But Dad being overseas, I went to the dean and said, please, I needed one more chance. And they recognized, pre-calculus, you failed it 4 times. That shouldn't have hit you on your GPA the 3 times that you failed it after the first one. You're actually in good standing, but you should take algebra 2 and trigonometry, which I did pretty well. And I decided, of course, after taking those, that engineering wasn't the right for me. So I got an associate's degree at another school, 2 years in civil engineering technology. Went to work at the City of Austin construction inspector. And working with engineers, I recognized pretty quickly that these engineers weren't so smart. We were really good friends, and we collaborate a lot on a lot of different aspects of the construction project. I had great ideas. They had great ideas. We worked together. I learned a lot. I learned mostly these guys were no smarter than me. City had layoffs, so I decided to go back to school. Since I was in Austin, I'll go to UT. And UT kind of laughed at me and said, look at these grades. No, you're not getting in here. So I decided to go to ACC, Austin Community College, where I enrolled. And I want to stress that community college is a really, really positive and good thing. Smaller classes, covered the materials. I took pre-calculus. They said I need to take calculus 1, but I said I need to take pre-calculus. I got an A in pre-cal. In Cal 1, I got an A. Cal 2, I got an A. Differential equations, I got an A. I knew what it meant to graduate and what was waiting for me at this point. So I was much more mature in my school. I reapplied for UT at Austin. Not only were my grades high enough, they gave me a scholarship, believe it or not, which was pretty exciting. During this time, I worked part-time at the Texas Department of Transportation. I was an older student when I was at school, the president of the student chapter of ASCE. I was a mentor for various students, many students that were struggling with grades, and watching their eyes get wide when I told them, I know you're having trouble, but believe it or not, as president of the student chapter, I took that same class and flunked it 4 times. So you can do it. Not everybody skates through, not everybody goes through without encountering failure. It's a positive experience. I got my master's degree. And with my master's degree, after the bachelor's, I went to work in Washington, D.C. at an organization called ITS America, where I stayed for 3 years before I was recruited by as a VP at a consulting firm, where I worked for another 3 years here in the D.C. area. It was a national firm. And then I started my own company, E2 Engineering. It was not an easy start. It's one thing to have a network, which I did from working at ITS America nationwide. It's another thing to get those folks to give you a contract to do some work. Very different thing. But we made it. We made it. We started and we made it. Much of our work has been as a subconsultant over the years, but we've primed quite a few projects as well. And most of our work is from companies and clients, like most folks, that know who we are, what we do, and how we do it. Phone rings constantly here at E2 Engineering. People want us to join their team or to do work for them as clients, because they know what we do and they know we're darn good at what we do. In September, we celebrated my company's 22nd anniversary. We've had ITS contracts, that's Intelligent Transportation Systems contracts, or conducted research in 34 states and 22 countries around the world. My wife works for me full time. She's a project manager, and we worked on key projects from remote locations, because we're small, right? There's 3 of us. Myself, my wife, and we have one part-timer. And this part-timer is actually a young lady that I went to school with, middle school with in outside of Tokyo, another military brat. We wound up living close together here in Virginia. So the three of us have done quite a bit of work. I remember one particular remote project, one of many. This one we're working for our Florida DOT, one of our Florida DOT projects, and working with our stakeholders. We actually were working hard, working with the stakeholders. And I remember looking down at the fish through the glass floor, sitting in our overwater bungalow on the island of Bora Bora. Now, if engineering isn't an amazing thing, but it allowed us to be able to do our work remote. The client didn't know that. They didn't need to. So they didn't even know that we were doing the work and we were getting it done, and we were getting it done well. We've also done things like taken breaks and gone for a walk along the Great Wall of China, watched fireworks explode over the city of Hong Kong, ate pizza along the Champs-Élysées in Paris, we're diving with whale sharks off the coast of Malaysia. All these things are not vacations, although you could say they were. They're more like, well, let's work until 2, and then let's head to the beach. Let's work until noon, and then there's a place I want to take you for dinner there in Hong Kong. All those things have been as a result of the engineering degree and the possibilities. But I will say that as far as engineering is concerned and the life that we've had, giving back is extremely important. And we happen to believe that to whom much is given, much is expected. And we've been blessed with a lot of things. So we've done quite a bit of mission work in Honduras and Liberia and West Africa and Haiti and various places across the US. And we've learned from all of these travels and what we've seen just how blessed we are. Life is not fair. Whether it's, as I have seen my white counterparts, fellow engineers and female, we all don't have the same opportunity. Life is not fair. But we are, and I consider myself very blessed. In fact, we have seen things that make me realize that everybody watching this video is actually more fortunate than you know, whether you believe it or not. When you go to countries and you visit families and you see people that 6 or 7 members of a family in a one-room shanty shack with a dirt floor, where they have to padlock the doors and windows, not to keep the kids from leaving, but to keep people from coming in and harming their children. And that's the life. When you realize that, and in at least 2 occasions we know where the young children inside were fiddling with the stove, caught fire, and the community around the shanty tried to rescue the children, but they couldn't because of the padlocks on the doors and the windows. You recognize how fortunate you have it where you are right now, when you know what exists around the world. Well, so being Black in the field of engineering, I will tell you that with respect to DE&I have to be careful about the words I use, the clothes I wear, and being smart but not too smart, depending on who the audience is. It's a consideration, a very real consideration. And that's all outside of what the solutions are that we come up with as engineers. And in the rare case where there's a client, decision-making client that's Black, that's always a good thing, because then I can just speak more freely about here's what the research shows, here's some possibilities and directions we can go, instead of being concerned about how I say something just as much as what I'm saying. Because there's that perception. A room full of consultants. You may have 4 consultants, 3 of which are white, 1 is which is Black. And whether you want to acknowledge it or not, or maybe it's just not the case for you, but I know that for 25 years it has been the case, that Black person in the room, they're there because of the DBE requirement. Hardly ever does it cross their mind that that Black guy or woman is as smart as the white guys in the room, if not smarter than they are. It doesn't come across. So what you say and how you say it is really important. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that is new to many people, but to me and many people like me, DE&I has been an issue for generations and generations. What do you mean by that, Richard? I'm glad you asked, because it's very important for you to know. There is more than one America. This is true in transit. This is true in parking. This is true in law enforcement. This is true in mobility as a service, things like e-scooters and Uber and Lyft. There are many other DE&I issues that have overlooked a segment of our population and their realities. Simple things like sidewalks, transportation apps, housing, employment, education, and the list goes on. All of these items are life-changing, but if you don't know that life exists, how can we as engineers change things for the better? So like to say, you don't know what you don't know. And there's a lot for all of us to learn. There's a lot of things that we can make better for all of our stakeholders across this nation as engineers. So I guess I would say, let's talk. There's much to discuss. With that, I thank you for this opportunity to speak, and we welcome your questions.
Thank you, Richard. Our final speaker of the evening leads the NSPE-DEI Advisory Committee as its chair. Professional engineer Jaquelyn Brooks. Jaquelyn is a senior engineer at WSP USA Inc. In Tallahassee, Florida, specializing in remediating soil and groundwater contaminated with petroleum from underground storage tanks and discharges. Early in her career, she has worked in the areas of quality control, research and development, hazardous waste disposal, nuclear waste management, and emergency response and disaster and domestic preparedness programs. Jaquelyn holds a BS in chemical engineering, and she obtained an MA in educational leadership because she is a passionate person about helping underrepresented students gain equal access to STEM opportunities. Her passion is mentoring underrepresented STEM students by helping them identify their gifts and being a champion for helping them in utilizing these gifts in STEM fields. I present Jaquelyn Brooks.
My name is Jackie Brooks. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I wanted to take a few minutes to share with you some of the situations I've been involved in, and that way you can kind of get an idea of the issues I've had to address being a Black female engineer. So, scenario number one. I'm working at Coca-Cola Foods. I'm working in the Minute Maid orange juice production. And my job is a quality control engineer, so that I'm pulling orange juice cans off of the floor every hour and verifying that they are within specifications. The big issue they were having was running it through the freeze tunnel too quickly. And so every time I would check the temperature, it would fail specifications, and them stacking them up in the warehouse on pallets, they would have fallen. So I would end up flagging pallets and pallets of product. And so by the morning I had the third shift, it would be stacked. And the first shift would have to redo all that along with their work for the day. That went on for about a month, and flagging product every single day, and to where people were starting to harass me because they were considering closing this plant. Even the FDA inspectors, like, Jackie, you got to give them a break. But I couldn't falsify the data. And so I was really torn because I couldn't fix this. I don't know how to do that. So after about another month, and the product's still getting flagged every day, they really started threatening me, my life. And so I quit the job. And unbeknownst to me, I got a call 2 weeks later. Unbeknownst to me, there had been an undercover investigation going on. And Coca-Cola corporate called me and said, Jackie, we found that you were right, that the first and second shift were actually falsifying the data. And we'd like to apologize to you. We'd like to offer you the opportunity to go anywhere you want in the company. And recently I had been speaking with some people over at the research and development building on the plant. So I asked if I could go there. It was like 15 more miles away. And that's what I did. I got promoted to be a research and development technologist. So that's scenario number one. Well, let's start up there. The things I learned from that situation: always tell the truth, always be fair. It's not your fault that the equipment is not working properly. You have to make sure you're documenting properly to cover yourself always. And the plant did close down. So that was that scenario. I learned a lot from that people, I'm dealing with people's livelihoods, but I still couldn't do it. And that was very hard for me. So scenario number two, my boss started yelling at me. And I was like, okay. I let him finish. I let him get it completely out. And after he was done, I said, the next time you choose to yell at me, I will be walking out. I don't deserve that. Well, a week later, he did it again. And I walked out. I walked the parking lot. I was like, I can't believe he just did this. I'm like, what am I going to do? And I'm fuming. He ain't yelling at nobody else, I'm losing it. But I had to keep it together. You have to watch what you say. You have to calm down. Don't retaliate in anger. Just think about it. Sleep on it. Do whatever you have to do to not blow something that you may regret later. So I go back in. I wait for him. He comes to me finally. His face is all red. And he says, okay, I'm ready to talk now. I'm ready. I'm calm. And we didn't have a problem after that. He ended up actually asking me to be his business partner later on. So that's scenario number two. Scenario number three. I'm in a state building as a contractor, and the chief engineer starts yelling at me. I'm like, oh my goodness, here we go again. Since I wasn't a state employee, I couldn't file a grievance. I did tell my supervisor this was a very lucrative contract for them, so it's like, let's work it out. I started taking other people in the office with me when I went to see him about anything, but he kept yelling at me. So I put it in my performance review that this was abusive and I will be looking for another job. Within a year, he was demoted, and because of that, he quit. And at the same time, I was offered another job, which I took. I was very upset. My company wouldn't value me enough to protect me from that. And that was eye-opening. But I needed a neck surgery done. My mom passed away. I needed time to get it together. So that was a good break from my routine and the pressures of that job that I was in. So that was that. And what I learned from those two scenarios is no one should be ever yelling at you. That is totally unprofessional, and it is never a place in the workplace for that to be happening. Don't allow it to happen. People will treat you the way you allow them to treat you. And first, you just have to really have the respect for yourself. And so that was what I learned from that scenario. And I was like, wow, this is a lot, And sometimes you have to sacrifice. You have to make the move to let people know you're serious. I won't be tolerating this. So I did end up coming to the company again later on, coming back. So I left in good terms. I was able to come back. Scenario number 4. Okay, so I am working at the nuclear reservation. And when I get there, there's a lot of opportunities, they need help. And I saw they were willing to pay for people who are willing to work hard. And that's what I have learned. People are willing to pay if you're willing to work hard. So I was working hard and I got a raise, and then I became an acting manager. And within like 2.5 years, my salary had increased about $25,000, which was very hard because I literally burnt out at this job. And that was very difficult. So as part of the helping me out, because they had done this and they were scared I was going to file a lawsuit, I transferred across country to another nuclear reservation, just to be closer to home. And when I get there, I'm sitting in a human resources office, and I was there all morning long. I was like, what's going on? I finally asked the lady, like, can you tell me what's the holdup? She comes to me and she says, well, we're trying to work out this discrepancy. There's an issue with your salary. There's no way you could have possibly had that change in your increase in such a short period of time. And I looked at her and I said, no, I've earned every dollar of that increase. And I'm thinking of the burnout. I was like, I've gone through a burnout. And you're questioning my salary. And I had to hold it together again. I had to hold it together again. And after I told her that that was real, and the next statement was, I'd like to see my supervisor now, please. And that was the last thing I said to her. I was done after that. Like, if this was a white male, you would have never questioned that increase in salary ever. So it's not just the engineering staff that needs to be trained in diversity and inclusion and equity. It's also the support staff that we all need to be reminded of how we don't realize that we're stereotyping people. We really don't. And I accept that, and I'm willing to help educate and train and be the person who's not like the stereotype to break that thought process. So those are some of the few of the issues that I've had to deal with as an engineer. And before I leave, I'd like to make a special plug for becoming a professional engineer. It really does have a lot of perks. I've been a professional engineer now for about 15 years. And I do see at times when the market is slow and people are laying off staff, it's always the staff that are not the professional geologists, not the professional engineers that are being laid off. And I really just find more security with it. I really do. It was very hard. I had to take the PE exam three times to pass it. So I don't want you to feel, if you're considering taking your professional engineering exam, that, you know, oh, I'll never be able to do that. Yes, it is a lot of studying. Yes, it is a lot of work. My kids were like, Mom, please don't do it again. We won't see you. But it is very worth it. And so I'd like to encourage you to consider your future, you know, not while you're young, think about later. What do you really want in your life long term? And if you're interested in becoming a professional engineer, I strongly recommend that you speak with Ken about that, and he can speak with you some more about it. And I can speak with you if you're interested. Thank you so much for your time. Take care.
Thank you, Jackie, for sharing that with us. Thank you to all of the speakers for their very interesting presentations. At this time, we will open up the presentation for the questions posed to the panelists. And we have, I believe everybody is coming online now, our panelists. And we'll start with our first question to Carrie Greenfelder. Carrie, what have been some of the challenges you have faced being a woman working in the water and wastewater industry?
Sure, that's a great question, and I saw a couple similar ones come through in the Q&A, and you know, it was intentional that I left out of my presentation, hey, I've done all these projects as a woman, because frankly, during, I'd say, the first 15 to 20 years of my career, I didn't notice it. I didn't feel different. It didn't make a difference. Maybe, you know, even back in college, maybe I missed that lack of diversity. Maybe I never even noticed it, but it really wasn't a big issue. And I didn't pay a lot of attention, or it didn't matter that I was one or maybe one of few in the room. And that has carried over into my professional career. I've worked with constructors. I've had that position of authority where folks have listened to me, and it's never been a problem. But I would say really within almost my, I don't know, last 5, 6, 7 years or so of my career, that's really when I've started to notice the differences of being a woman in this space. And really, it's as I've done this climb up the ladder and wanted to take on a greater position of authority or leadership. And really, I look around the room and I look above me, and there's really there's not a lot of folks that quote unquote look like me up that chain. And I notice it more and more, both in the water, wastewater space, but even at my own companies. But I will say I'm very hopeful. I'm starting to see a lot more women in position of authority, especially in the municipal water and wastewater space. I'm seeing more women promoted in this industry, even at my own company. So, I'm hopeful that there is a seat for me at the top. But in the world that I've been in, it wasn't noticeable, but now it's starting to be. So hopeful that it'll change, and hopeful that this group will even be a part of helping that change come about.
Okay. Thank you, Carrie. Question here for Richard. You mentioned in your talk a number of things. What do you see are the issues that are ignored in transportation planning and design impacts to communities of color? And if so, can you speak about the issues of walkability, transit and technology, air quality and health, and freeway design challenges?
Oh, sure, Ken. Be glad to. But first, I really need to respond to that previous question. Also,
Okay.
there was a little bit different experience than what Carrie had. I remember back in the days when I worked for TxDOT, and I worked in bridge inspection, and I remember we're in the district office. I was an engineering tech 3 at that time, and we were planning a strategy for a bridge inspection, and it was a pretty long structure. And so we're figuring, okay, we won't need the snooper on this part, but we'll check the substructure here. We'll take a team, go over here, we'll work our way into. And so there are probably about 7 of us looking at sets of plans on how we're going to attack this structure. And I was the only Black guy there. I was about halfway as far as ranking and positions of all the folks in our group. And I remember a gentleman walked in, a white gentleman walked in with a suit, somebody coming and visiting the district. And we were talking, he stood there at the door and he was listening to us. I just figured, hey, maybe he's probably just listening in. So we were talking, and then we had a pause. And then he came over, this guy came over to us standing there, and he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, we're out of toilet paper in the men's room." And I remember, here I am, of course, I'm the only Black guy there, and I'm sure the jaws were dropping, and I remember looking at him because I was actually very surprised too that he would wait and make sure he let me know that we were out of toilet paper. And I said, well, thank you for letting us know. We'll let somebody know if they can get on that as quickly as we can. Thank you, sir. And then we went back to work. That was an experience that I won't forget. That is an experience that I don't tell people about, but it exists, and it has happened. Things like that have happened and continue to happen. But anyway, okay. I just wanted to share that happens. Walkability. There are things like sidewalks. When we talk about communities and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I used to be a city inspector for the city of Austin, and I remember we put streets and drainage. We make sure sidewalks are in, and so I know sidewalks inside and out. And even in my neighborhoods today, I see places where there are sidewalks, and I see places where there are no sidewalks. And in our travels, we see that, and it's interesting because new developments come up, and you have a nice house with your 3-car garage, and we don't want people in, and so we don't have sidewalks in the streets without taking into consideration that there are communities that need to serve those houses. They use transit typically. They need to walk from the stop to wherever they're going. They have to walk in the street. There are people that want to and need to go to the grocery store. They have 1 car, families of lower income. And so walking across this major boulevards, but pedestrians that need to go get groceries, or whether they have to or whether they want to do that for exercise, they don't have that option. And if you want to cross the street, you've got to go down 4 blocks, cross the street at the pedestrian crossing, and then come back up, and you go to the store that you're looking at from this side of the street. We're not taking those communities into consideration when we talk about DEI. And that's really bad. And there's so many examples that if we had time, it's another program to show you transit bus stops where we have nice bus stops, let's say signs there in the grass and the mud, and then there's no sidewalk on a single lane, two lane road, where if you're carrying groceries and you have a child in a stroller, forget about it. You're in the street. You cannot get there. And meanwhile, other more affluent neighborhoods not only have nice, pretty bus stops with covers, they have real-time information for them, as well as sidewalks and what have you. And so we're not looking at all of our communities the same way. That's just one example. There's the whole idea you've heard of, well, you know, that Ken, he's a good guy, but he's from the other side of the tracks. Well, that's because freeways and railroads were put in those places for a reason. They were separating communities. And there's investment going in one community, lots of good investment, not in the other communities. And so you start to see a deterioration on that side of the tracks. Not an accident, but we don't think about that. And of course, ports, air quality, there's jobs, but there are neighborhoods that are minority, and those kids are running into asthma, and other health benefits, disbenefits, and dying younger. But hey, that's just the cost of doing business. Well, yeah, unless you're a minority and you live in that neighborhood. There are a lot of things that are happening around us that we're not taking. And I can go on, but I'll stop there on that one. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, thank you. Jackie, question for you. As a mother and a grandmother, how have you managed the life-work balance in your life, and are there any regrets?
I grew up with a single mother, no father in the home. This is very common for Black families. And I hardly ever saw my mom. She worked 3 jobs when I was growing up. So I was determined when I had my children that I would be home. And I did stay home for the first 4 years. So I had my son, I adopted my daughter 2 years later, and I stayed home 2 more years. I never regretted it. I still don't regret it. People thought, oh no, you're gonna mess up your career, you're gonna fall out of cycle. I'm like, what cycle? Who am I comparing myself to? You know, it doesn't matter. And people put that pressure on you, but in reality, I would do it 10 times again. And it's hard now with COVID, not being able to see my grandbabies. It's hard when the kids were growing up and I had a really stressful day. And I'm still processing it when I walk in the door and I find out my daughter's suspended. You know, these kind of things are going on. It's real life, you know, but you do learn to compartmentalize your brain. Okay, on the way home, we're shutting this down because you know when you walk in that door, you're gonna be mom. And you practice it. It does happen. By the time they go to bed though, work is coming back up here again. It's like, I gotta figure this out before tomorrow. But it is a balance. It is a decision and a choice. If you're gonna put family first at a certain period of time in your life, if you decide you're gonna have children, you just know it's gonna be difficult for a period. I have seen where people are not considered for jobs for that reason. I never really had that issue, but I did lose a job when I was pregnant because they were afraid that I would be putting too much stress and then that would be a liability to the company. That was very hard. So it's still probably happening, but that was a while back. I wouldn't know.
Okay. Carrie, and this kind of goes with some of the questions, other questions that are coming up. In your opinion, how do we raise or discuss the benefits of diversity and inclusion on our nation's infrastructure projects with management, and how do we bring it to clients, architects, engineers, and contractors? How do we get them all together on this topic?
Yeah, that's a great question, and not an easy one either. You know, I personally, I mean, I don't shy away from the DEI conversation, and to me, that's regardless of what the audience is and what that looks like. And so, you know, I like to use the phrase, let's make it part of the conversation. And so maybe, you know, there's someone who hasn't yet heard that diversity of thought and experiences and different voices in the room. Maybe there's somebody there that hasn't heard that helps you, that will contribute to the success of your project. Maybe, you know, you haven't heard this yet, but it also help your bottom line. And so, you know, most of us probably on this call, or a lot of us, are in a for-profit world. And so we're all in this to make more money. So if there's a way to do that better, let's incorporate this into the conversation. And so, you know, I found, I mean, I did this day one with my interview with Burns and McDonnell. I made it part of the conversation right then and there, and I'm still that way. And now I kind of find it's not just me making it part of the conversation. It's those that report to me. It's those that are above me. It's those that are helping me be successful and part of my different teams. And so it really just, if somebody spots a disparity, we talk about it. And now it's just comfortable conversation. But that didn't just happen overnight. I mean, it's taken me 5, almost 6 years at this new firm to really make it a comfortable part of conversation. But talking about those benefits of diversity and benefits for your team, you know, it's tough at first, but I really recommend just keep beating that drum. It is very important, and it's very important to our business and where we're headed in the engineering space.
Let me pose this question to all of the panelists. Have you seen acceptance of diversity, equity, and inclusion improve over the years? There's much more awareness in 2020, but we all recognize we have a long way to go. How close or how far do you think engineering field is to being diverse and inclusive of all? How do we measure success and failure? So anybody want to raise their hand and say, jump in on that?
I'll do it.
Go ahead, Jackie.
I know for our DEI committee, we spoke about this last month, and we're like, okay, how are we going to know when our goal is met that we have a diverse community in engineering? And we decided that when our engineering community looks like the world and how diverse it is, then we would have met our goal.
Do we have a feel for
it? It is difficult to say that we've met it so far. We're not even.
We're not there now, but do we have a feel for when that might be? Or do we have any kind of timeline?
No, we don't. And I don't want people to feel to be discouraged, because we've been like this for many, many years. I am not deceived that this is going to happen overnight in 1 year, 2 years. I don't want anybody to have that dream world. It's just not real. The gaps in how we grew up, how we learn, the spaces we interact with are just so different. It needs to be merged over time. We get to know each other. That's why the younger generation, they support each other a lot more, because they grew up together. They went to school together. And so they know that's not true about Bobby over here. They understand that more because they spent time together. And I think the more we spend time together, and like Richard said, let's talk. And they see, oh, wow, they do have a brain. They do have a brain cell. Okay. Oh, they are capable. All right. And it kind of breaks down those stereotypes that they don't even know are existing right now.
And
Rick, you're up in my age group somewhere. Well, probably not that quite that old, but have you seen some changes, Richard, over the years in acceptance and diversity and equality?
I will say, sadly, no. But I will say this. For the first time that in my life, we are now beginning to listen. People are beginning to listen. And in the past, that was never even an option, right? So in order to change somebody's mind, I think they really need to be given facts, and they need education. And that education comes from learning from other people. And you can't do that until you can sit down and listen. My fear is this phase, and I hope it's more than a phase, that we're going through as a nation, and it's around the world, is I hope this isn't something that ends in 6 months when we have a new flavor of the year, and this is put on the back burner again and things slide back down the hill. The more we can have this conversation, the more educated we are, then I think we'll begin to see some of the changes that need to be made. Carrie brought up about her company, and there are some companies that are doing some good things, but there are a heck of a lot of companies that are still not doing doing some good things. And we learned that from the NSPE survey, just with our own membership. There's a really diverse set of points of view of this whole issue. And it's kind of scary, and it's also kind of encouraging at the same time. There are some things that are going well and some things that aren't. But I don't think there's major changes right now, at least not like I'd like to see. But I think the biggest thing is we're now beginning to listen and recognize that most people, all people, have certain gifts that we need. And let's listen and hear about them. And I know Carrie wanted to answer something there, and
yeah, I just wanted to piggyback that, I kind of, within the same brain thought, I'm on both sides of the spectrum. Sometimes I feel like we're doing a really good job and we're moving the needle, and then right 2 seconds later, I feel like we have such a ways to go. And somebody said something to me once in a DEI conversation, that if we continue going at the rate that we're trying to make changes, it's going to take us another 400 years to get it right. And that's too long for me. And it's almost, in the DEI space, we're very soft, we're very cautious, we move very slowly. And I think of myself as a manager at work, new policies that I roll out. I'll take sexual harassment. The policy is 0 tolerance. It starts today. Everybody sign this paper or watch this training, and we move on. But when you take a topic related to DEI, it seems very slow. We roll out policies very slowly, let folks adopt them. And so, I would answer that we have a very long way to go and we're moving way too slow, but I also see some progress. It is, conversations are getting started. Some of my other organizations, especially in the water space, are starting to have DEI groups. I mean, NSPE started this and was on the forefront of kind of moving the needle. But other organizations, a lot of companies are adding, DEI positions within their corporate structure. And so it's becoming more and more mainstream to do this. And so I'm hoping that 400 years to make change, we can close that and move that needle a lot faster.
Well, I think one of the things that's helping is discussions like this, sharing your stories. And this has been my goal in being active in this DEI advisory committee, is to help move that needle, help get the stories out, show that everybody has real feelings, real stories, real experiences that aren't just anecdotal. They're actual experiences. These things have happened. And the more we talk about it, I think the better people we are in the end. We don't want to see that happen again. If you don't talk about it, nobody knows that it even happened. So I think this kind of a conversation should continue on, and I'm glad to be moderating this presentation this evening. Jackie, there was a question about your experience and value of obtaining a professional engineering license. Tell me how that fits into diversity too.
Okay. Most of the time when I go to a conference and I tell people that I'm a PE, they immediately say, "Oh, you went to FAMU. Oh, you went to an HBCU," which is a historically Black college. They assume that happened to water down my potential. When I tell them I went to the University of Florida, I can't even look at them because they're in shock. And it's like, there's no way you could have done that. And so that in itself changed the perspective. So when you talk about getting a PE, you have to have the references to support that. And so all I suggest is just doing your very best and getting to know your colleagues. And the more you're yourself, the more they'll tell you the areas that you're bad in, that you're doing poorly in, the weak areas. Then you can learn from them. Take anything anybody they may want to put you down, but like, no, I'm gonna learn what you know, and then I'm gonna be just as smart as you are in this area, and then you won't be able to put me down. I'm willing to learn. So what about that? You're not going to humiliate me. No, let's just sit down and figure it out. And then I know what you know. Let's move on, you know? So I think that helps me. That's how I handle that. The areas I knew I was weak in, I'm a sponge, teach me. And then I was learning practical on the job as well. So that helped me when I took the PE exam. Of course, I had to take it 3 times. So that was very hard. But it was very worth it. And I'd like to help people. I think a main problem is people expect Blacks, I don't know about others, to learn the way they learn. And that is a huge fallacy. And until we accept that everybody's not learning the same, and we have to supplement that with others in case the curriculum isn't going to change at the university level, it's not going to improve. And so that's why I focus on that lower level, because it's not that we're not capable. It's the matter of engaging them and the matter of helping them with the fundamentals like Richard. We're just as capable. Me, I'm a visual learner. I have to see it. The calculations and all that book text work means nothing to me. I have to see it, I have to write it, I have to go to the wastewater treatment plant. I have to go to the landfill with my plans and walk it out. That's just me. How is everybody else learning? Everybody's not using that textbook to learn. And of course, you know, we find out 60% are cheating in educational leadership classes. Like, oh, I'm sitting here trying to figure it out and half of them are cheating. Give me a break, you know? I'm suffering here. No wonder they won't let me in their study group.
Well, I think we all have some of those experiences too. I'm not sure that it's.
I just know me. I know how I
I've already
struggle because I learned. Yeah.
But Carrie, there was a question here for you about being a chemical engineer. And
Sure.
Jackie, I don't know if you know anything about California, but Carrie has lived in California. They're asking about chemical engineers in engineering registration in California. And maybe
Yeah,
you can
I
address
saw
that.
that question, and I honestly don't know a whole lot about California registration. So I'm not registered in the state of California. I actually lived in New Mexico and mainly worked there before I moved back to the Midwest. But I know there's a lot of differences across the states on just how you refer to yourself as a professional engineer or a chemical engineer or just an engineer. And you know, some of my registrations are specific to, you know, chemical. Some of them I'm just a licensed engineer, and so some of that is just state by state. And I tell you, I'm horrible about it on which one is which. So I always have to look it up before I you know, write a report or put my stamp on something on what I'm supposed to be and how full I need to sign my name for this one. And I know California, and I'm seeing some trends of that. And I think we even have Trisha Hatley on the call here. She might be able to answer this one in the chat a little better than I can. But I don't know if any of our other panelists are registered in California, might be able to answer the title versus practice.
No, I've never done work in California. I do have my NCES, so that I'm able to apply for my PE in other states except California because I got it in Florida.
Yeah, okay.
I am registered in Georgia and Florida, but none others because I've never had the need to.
Yeah.
I can tell you from my experience, California's PE licensing is quite different from other states. And so I think it's a more specific thing to somebody who's gone through it here in California. Richard, there's a question here for you. In your view, is there a bias in the urban planning and design profession? And how do we promote and protect diversity in design of urban systems, such as parking, rideshare technologies, etc.?
Certainly, and I'm afraid that there is bias, and I had the pleasure of serving as a guest lecturer to graduate class in urban planning, transportation and planning at University of Southern California, USC. And one of the things they brought up to me, which I really appreciated, some of the students, was they looked at their textbooks, and all the textbooks they had were written by white males. And these were dealing with planning, urban planning. And so, and when I talked a little bit before about, I said that there is more than one America, right? There are different realities for different segments of our population. And when you're well-educated white male and you're drawing up plans for cities as to how they should be, and you're teaching our next generation, they're not doing that on purpose. They're not omitting stakeholders on purpose. They just don't know what their life is like. And so the plans are what they are in the textbook, and that's what we go out and we build. And we continue to have challenges of needs not being met. And the only reason they're not being met because we didn't know those needs existed. So there is bias that is there. And when we're in the consulting world, and, or whether you're on the public sector or private sector, and we need stakeholder input, we make the mistake of sometimes, quite often, listening to town hall meetings with where the most vocal people show up and they've got a lot to say. Now, are they majority? Most often, no, they're not. But they are certainly loud, and I hear you, and we're going to make sure we take care of that. And instead of going into those groups that don't show up, and I will add, there are a lot of groups that you need to look for beyond your knowledge that they exist. You need to find out from others. But I also use the example of we've got a group of stakeholders. We got 30 people in there, and we've got 2 Black people in there, and so we have the perspective from the Black community. No, you don't. You have the perspective of 2 Black people. There's a big difference. You have the perspective of the 2 women that are in the meeting, but they don't by any means represent all women in that entire region or all Black people in that entire region. But that's the way we do it. That's the way it's built. And then we go on, and it's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. There's bias hidden in. One last thing I want to add is on this DEI issue. I want you all to know a couple of things. Number one, certainly in the case of minorities, we have a lot to overcome, like a lot of people do. But I know in my case, I never thought I was good enough to do that because dad was a medic, mom didn't finish high school. The kids I went to school with, most of them in civil engineering. Well, my uncle was an engineer. My dad's an engineer. I didn't know any Black engineers. I wasn't even sure if that was something that I could do. And when you go to a meeting, and I've done this, I want you all to consider this. When you go to a meeting and you're sitting there, as I have been most of my career, the only Black person in the room, and we talk about things with respect to transponder tags, and they're put on a blacklist. We talk about things that we associate colors with. Well, we're going to blackball this company. This company is blackballed. As the only Black person in the room, I kind of look around thinking, blacklist, blackball, and then when you get to emails, oh yeah, make sure when you get my email, you put me on your white list. That way it's a good list, and you come, and nobody even thinks about perspective of a Black person. They're thinking, okay, so Black is bad, white is good. What does that make me? And so we use these vernacular, we use these words quite often without thinking of the impacts. And it's much more devastating than people understand or recognize until you speak up and say, let's not use that anymore, because hey, for Black folks, that's probably not a good thing to say. And I've started to say that, and people are starting to listen. Just something to think about.
Since we've ripped the bandage off and had some frank conversation here, I have a question that came up. How does religion affect diversity? Do you still encounter prayers at professional meetings? How can we tactfully change some of the traditions in place in some agencies? Anybody want to touch that one?
I'll jump in right quick. Religion, I haven't been to a meeting that I can remember where it's a professional meeting association where we start off with prayer. And I'm sure it happens, but I think it's a problem. I'm a religious person. I believe in God. I know my blessings and where they came from. But I also know when you have offices that are diverse with respect to religions. Hey, everybody, we're going to have happy hour. It's good because they got pictures half off and they got all the wings you can eat. Well, you know, some of those people in that don't, from the religion, don't drink alcohol and they don't eat meat. All right. So, well, why don't you ever come to our meetings, man? We always look for you. Well, because you don't respect that everybody doesn't have the same religion. And that's an issue that we've got to change. We need to change. And hopefully we will change.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on you, Richard, there. I've seen some changes over the years. I know my current company, we have specific rooms for prayer, and it's, you know, completely acceptable. If it's, you know, prayer time, you can leave the meeting and you know, do your prayers and come back, and it's perfectly acceptable. I would say some of the harder ones, you mentioned vernacular. You know, I hear everybody around the room always saying, you know, Merry Christmas, enjoy your Christmas next week. And the gentleman that I sat next to for 3 years was Jewish. And so every time he heard somebody across the room say Merry Christmas, he said, and Hanukkah. And, you know, and it sort of kind of became part of everybody's conversation. Hey, let's just say happy holidays. Then we're inclusive of everybody, even in this little bay of 6 desks, right? And so, you know, I think folks are opening up a little bit to it, but it goes back to one of your earlier points, Richard, just about the education. Folks didn't know that this man was Jewish and didn't know that, you know, we were leaving him out of the conversation. And so he started educating others. This is my faith. His daughter is actually a rabbi over in the Atlanta area. And so, you know, the more we learned about him and his family and his religion, it was, you know, he's just another guy, part of our team. And you know, it was part of comfortable conversation, but it took that education piece first and somebody to step up and say, hey, let's not do it like that anymore. Let's say it like this. But Jackie, I think you were about to say something.
I see the religion issue as a lot of other issues. I think in a particular group, we need to just give people the opportunity to express if they're feeling uncomfortable about a situation. And that takes making them feel comfortable and inclusive enough to do that. And once that happens, you have to show respect. I mean, and I think that's the biggest issue everyone's dealing with. You want me to change my way of life? No, it's about respect. And if you value your team, you'll show the respect.
Yeah, and I can say from my point of view, when I first became an NSPE member, they had their meetings, their board meetings, Sunday mornings. Well, I am a religious person and Sunday mornings was church. And so I actually stepped up and changed the meeting time of day. That's all it was. But people, because nobody had stepped out and asked about it or suggested it, it doesn't happen. So the thing that I want to emphasize that Richard said in the beginning, let's talk. Let's keep this conversation going. I'm very pleased that we've had some good questions and good conversation this evening. We have time for one more question. And it was a question that says, as a successful white engineer, what can I do to help increase diversity in our profession?
Well, as the white engineer here on the panel, I'll start with this one. You know, I would say, you know, I always say this to my recruiting team at work, hire someone that doesn't look like you. And when I came in the doors at Burns and McDonnell, my entire recruiting team was white. I said, maybe we should start with a little bit of diversity here on our recruiting team. And now we have a little bit of diversity. We have a little bit of gender parity as well. And so, you know, look beyond what you look like. And so I think that's a start. Make it part of the conversation. I really struggle with setting some goals. I don't like to check any boxes. I just want to, I know I use the phrase a lot, move the needle, but we got to, you know, watch where that needle is and try to make some improvements. Incremental improvements will add up to big improvements over time.
I think that as a white professional, that as a new person comes to the company, if you personally went to them or invited them to your office and said, you know, I just wanted to take some time to let you know that if anything's going down in here that you feel uncomfortable about, that I'd like for you to come and talk with me so that I can help you with that. I just want you to be aware that I'm here to help, and we really want you to be here. And so if you have any issues, you know, we can talk. I think the white individual opening that door, whether we're going to believe you or not, okay, I think is the first start.
Okay, very good. Well, Richard, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Lastly, based on what Jackie said too, I think it would be helpful because a lot of times as Black engineers, we reach out to other Black people because they're the only ones that understand what we're going through, right? So as from a white senior position of a white person to be able to say would mean a lot to have that person reach out to me and people like me. But you gotta walk the walk, right? You can't say, hey, I'm with you, and next thing you know, they're behind telling jokes about the Black guy and the whoever and stuff. Well, wait a minute. This is the person that's my out. You know, okay, I got you. I understand. So you really have to you have to walk the walk.
Well, we've come to the end of our allotted time to cover this very important and timely topic. I want to thank all of our speakers and thank you, our audience, for the questions and the participation. This helps move the needle along here. This program will be available in the future for repeat viewing and continuing this provoking discussion. We look forward to having an opportunity to meet all of you someday in person and stop going through these Zoom calls and things that we have to at this point. We'd like to thank our sponsors, NSPE California, NSPE DEI Advisory Committee, and the SDCEC, the San Diego County Engineering Council. I wish you all a good evening and thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Bye.